Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Robinson, and I'm the Clinical Resource Director for NCOPE. If you're on this webinar, you're joining us to learn about how to better leverage Encode Tracker, making the most of Encode Tracker's data, reports, and forms. This is a live presentation that we do try to run a few times per year, but I am going to record this instance just so that we can share it with other stakeholders as well. On that note, if you are joining us, I'd like to just take a moment and have you hop in the chat window. There's a little chat box that's built into Zoom, and let me know your role with the residency program. Are you a residency director or a residency mentor? Or you might even be the resident yourself. But I always like to get an idea about who's the audience that we're working with. So please feel free to comment in the chat window and let me know your role and responsibility within the context of the O&P residency program. All right, we got the full spectrum. I've got a mentor, a director, and a resident. So a little bit of everything sounds appropriate at this point in time. This is great. Well then, sounds like I have just the right audience and just the right presentation dialed in. This is good. So without further ado, let's dive in. If you have any questions along the way, please don't hesitate to drop the question into the chat window, or given the size, you will be able to unmute yourself. So you're welcome to unmute your microphone if you want to interject or ask a question. The only thing is I do reserve the right to hold that question until the end of the presentation in case I'm touching upon it later on. On that note, my learning objectives are to identify the one key takeaway from this presentation. That's right. I'm going to give you one slide that if you know that, you've gotten everything out of this talk that I sincerely hope you would and you share with everyone. 2, we're going to go ahead and just discuss the NCOPE staff responsible for some of the residency services. And 3, work through the functionality of Encode Tracker and how it enables residency. So without further ado, just about everything that you might want to know is going to be found on the NCOPE website. If you go to ncope.org/resident or ncope.org/tracker, you'll find a wealth of information. And actually what I'm going to do now is take you on a little bit of a tour so that we can actually see all the resources that are available on the website. So first and foremost, let's go to ncope.org/resident. So for my residents who are joining me live right now, we're just going to wait a moment while the site loads up. But this page has everything you might need to know about working through your residency and the specific roles, responsibilities, and requirements. This website's also updated when residents manage to ask us new questions. So the information and links that are provided here will always be updated if you manage to ask something we're not properly addressing. On that note, I haven't had to update any of these links for about 4 months, so they're very comprehensive. So if you're a resident or a director or mentor, your resident should have that webpage bookmarked, ncope.org/resident. And if you're wondering, how do I get there from just going to the regular website, just click on the word NCOPE and it'll take you to the homepage. Click on the big blue residency button. And then you get to a screen where you have a nice young looking resident and a seasoned mentor, Michael, with a bunch of mentees. Just click on future residents, and that's how you get to that page directly. But spread the gospel, make sure all the residents know this is exactly where you want to have things bookmarked. The other thing that is going to be key is the webpage, ncope.org/tracker. And we have a deluxe Encode Tracker page, and a lot of folks go, oh, it's just some text and some links. Well, there's a lot more. Every single one of the forms in PDF format is available here. A frequently asked question dedicated Encode Tracker is here. The direct logins for the resident as well as the director/mentor are listed here. And every YouTube tutorial that we've ever made is listed here as well. And by the way, although I'm recording this for YouTube, all the videos that I have down here, with the exception of this one, they're 6 minutes or less. They're intentionally short because, well, your time is valuable. And I want to make sure that you are capitalizing and making the most of your time. Alternatively, if you're just on the website and you go to Residency, you could always go to Encode Tracker and it'll take you to that page as well. So there's no shortage of resources that are available. What I'm going to do now for a moment, though, is just have you stand by. And without further ado, to log into Encode Tracker, the website is, well, kind of obvious, but it's encodetracker.org. There are no apps you need to install on your smart devices, nor will we ever make an app. It's actually intentionally mobile as well as big screen friendly, so it works just as good on a laptop as it does on your handheld device. On that note, residents, go to encodetracker.org, and if you're a mentor and you bookmark encodetracker.org/admin, well, that'll automatically take you to the mentor login page. Don't worry, there's a big button for mentors to log in if you accidentally go to the resident sign in too. Now, what should residents see? So when residents log in, they're greeted with initially what's called a dashboard view. There's going to be information shown about who their mentor is, but they have a navigation menu that's consistent throughout. So there is the upload data file option. Upload data files works great for uploading clinical data from supported electronic medical record systems. On that note, that clinical data from electronic medical record systems only works from two systems, OPE and NextGen, which is the electronic medical record system used by Hanger Clinic. And I can tell you, it only works if you are using both of the tools correctly. So if you're not using the best possible workflows within OPE or NextGen, the data that comes out of it, it's not going to work to actually support a residency. On that note, we also have the option for residents to manually enter case data. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of clinical data encounters is done manually, and I'll show how that's done. Also, we have generating reports, and I'm going to walk you through how to generate reports, whether you're a mentor or director or the resident. There's also an Encode Tracker help button, and this is very similar to the help button that you'll encounter when you're working in a word processing program like Microsoft Word. If you click the help button in Microsoft Word, does it get you your boss? No, get you a developer, typically in another continent. Encode Tracker is no different. That help button will have resources for you, but if you actually submit a trouble ticket, it's going to a computer programmer and not anybody with the letter CPO or an NCOPE email address. There's also the resident profile, and this is consistent across the mentor and resident screen. And this allows you to just update things like your email address. Now, does it ever look different? And I can tell you, actually, yes, it does. Your navigation screen, you may notice that upload data has been removed, and that's sometimes done if you're using an EMR that's not supported at the clinic, because when you register as a resident, they identify what EMR is being used. Or if you are using OPE or NextGen and the data being uploaded just isn't very good, we'll also disable it, because at the end of the day, there's no point in uploading bad data into the system. Now, one of the things that I often get from individuals is this NCOPE Tracker support box. So if you click on that little exclamation point or question mark, you'll see the support. And there's a couple things that'll pop up. There's the FAQ, which is conspicuously on that website I already gave you, encope.org/tracker. And also those video tutorials that I showed you earlier that were built into the website, you can actually view them right within Encode Tracker. But if you go to submit a ticket, that's the best way to get a software developer, somebody who's highly gifted in using PHP and MySQL Server, but they actually don't know what an orthotist is. So if you're not looking for a programmer, don't use that box. It's great if you're using Tracker and you see something that says error 401, page not found. Now, entering clinical experience data, there's really two ways that it can be done. It can be done via manual data entry, and this is by far most common. So quite a few residents generally log their case entries without leveraging EMR-based data. It's totally fine. Data can be uploaded, but as I mentioned, only from supported EMR systems, OPE and NextGen. On that note, please communicate with your EMR vendor if you are running into issues with the reporting. So for example, if you're a Hanger resident and the NextGen system is giving reports that just don't look like what you're really doing, The only people that can help you are employees of Hanger and NextGen. The same goes with OP. Talk to your OP experience manager, and they can best help you out. Now, in terms of data entry requirements, what cases need to be logged into the system? All clinical encounters greater than or equal to 15 minutes should be logged for the entire residency. And they should be logged even if competency has been attained. So if you've been deemed competent for fitting AFOs, that's awesome. You still should have every AFO after you've been deemed competent doing that as well. Also, the resident must be certain to log cases on a regular basis in order to maintain accuracy. So ideally, no more than about 2 weeks should go between seeing the patient and having that data set enter Encode Tracker. And also these logs are verified and audited. And this is one of the things I get to do as a CPO to actually make sure all of the competencies and experiences have occurred. On that note, everything should be logged. So there's going to be things like diabetic shoes, which aren't an NCOPE competency for residency. Those get logged as well. Now, for residents, keep in mind that all fields are required by NCOPE with the exception of 2 different fields, documentation of goals and outcomes. And I'm going to do a demo on how to manually log a case because you'll find logging your case encounters takes less than a minute typically. On that note, if you're working with a patient, you go, gosh, I don't remember how old they were. Were they 5 or 6? You can always go back and edit it ad hoc. I'll show you how to do that too. Now, as I mentioned, OP is one of the supported systems, and you must be using what they refer to as optimal workflow. This is linked to how OP Scheduler is used. On that note, if you're using OP Scheduler and saying, my resident is an independent clinician, not a single case will be logged. So make sure that you're using OP Scheduler correctly, and don't worry, the OP team is happy to train you. For those of you that are engaged with the Hanger Clinic, again, the system works great for outputting data, but I can tell you the one field that it can't spit out is appointment type. So be prepared to manually update all of your appointment types if you're that lucky resident. On that note, if there's 10 required fields, having 9 of them pre-filled for you is pretty handy. Now, editing appointments can be done whether you're using OP or NextGen or anything, simply by going into the console as the resident and clicking a small pencil next to the appointment to edit and update the record. We'll do a demo of that right about now is what I'm thinking would be great for a quick demonstration. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and load up Encode Tracker with my fake resident. So while I'm doing that, so I'm going to load up the resident dashboard. You can get to it at any time by just clicking on that little logo. And the reason I like to do this demo is I want to make sure that the mentors are aware. Because at the end of the day, Rachel's got some valuable information like, is she past due on her residency? If you see overdue, that means your residency end date was before today and you're still not done. You also can see the mentor that you've been assigned to. We can see that Rachel's assigned to Chris Robinson, CPO, is the mentor. And we can see the last time that your mentor logged in, and your mentor should be checking in on you periodically. So if you see a mentor that hasn't logged in over a year, because again, this is the demo account that I'm showing off, your mentor might not be taking advantage of the data and reports that we're discussing today. So this is the dashboard, the very first screen that the resident will see. You'll also see the resident's most recent case entry. So if you haven't logged a case in more than 14 days, which is the case here, well, it'll also show up in red as a sign you probably need to enter some patient encounters. So let's go and log a case manually. So let's imagine we're not using an EMR that's supported, or we just want to do it ourselves. I hit create or edit data set. By default, it'll automatically enter today's date. So if you're logging it the exact same day that you saw the patient, you don't have to do anything. It's already pre-entered. Your patient age should be entered using whole numbers. So if you're working with an infant for a cranial helmet that's under 1 year of age, you're going to enter 0. But I'm going to actually enter a different pediatric case, something near and dear to me. Patient age, 9, male, type, orthotic, device type, upper, lower, spinal, or miscellaneous. Now this menu changes if you select prosthetic. You see that our spinal options went away. So the menu is designed to make things more intuitive. So let's say orthotic devices, lower, and And let's have this child receive bilateral ankle foot orthoses. Pretty common prescription for a 9-year-old child with cerebral palsy. Now, appointment type. There is a fixed list of appointment types: consultation, initial eval, measurement, casting, scanning, diagnostic fitting, delivery definitive fitting, follow-up, drop-off, adjustment, and repair. That's it. On that note, you might be thinking, I do a lot of evals and casting. Which one do I pick? You're going to pick the one where you put the most effort. If you do an eval and casting and the whole appointment's 60 minutes long, and you spend 20 minutes doing the eval and 40 minutes doing the casting, pick casting, because that's where you put your energy. Now, if it was the opposite, you spent 45 minutes doing the eval and you did a quick casting in 15 minutes, then you should pick eval. Let's go ahead and select initial evaluation just for training purposes. So now I can go in here and go, well, what's the ICD-10 code? I don't know this off the top of my head, but if I type in spastic and diplegic, you'll see that it actually has a search window. And if I click on it, ta-da, it enters the ICD-10 code. Now, engagement level. This is another one that's sometimes challenging for new residents, but engagement level is how engaged the resident was during the appointment. So this resident's in their final quarter of their residency, they should be doing this pretty much independently. They should be casting and evaluating them, and the practitioner that's supervising them, they should just be supervising. They should be pretty hands-off. The other two fields, outcome measures performed and goals documented, those are optional, and it's going to depend on the appointment type. But at an eval, very often, you'll administer outcome measures for baseline data and also document goals during the initial evaluation as well. So I'm going to click my save button. And even with all my talking and rambling, I just logged a case in 78 seconds based on the timer I was watching when I was doing this. So you might be thinking, Chris, what if it turns out that was a left AFO, it wasn't bilateral? Easy peasy, let's fix it. Go to open view/edit on the exact same screen. And what'll happen now is it'll actually load up my previous cases that have been logged. And it'll automatically have your most recent cases up at the top. And this little blue pencil here, I click edit. And I wanted to change it from bilateral to left. And I'm going to hit update. You notice the color of my pencil magically changes from blue to red. So you can even see what cases you've personally edited if you're a resident. Pretty cool, huh? On that note, the reports, those are consistent across mentors and directors and residents. I'm going to actually hold off till I do my mentor director demo. And the one thing that's still pretty unique for our residents, though, is Forms tool. When you click on the Forms tool, a couple things. Remember how I said when I log into the dashboard, I can see my mentor I'm assigned to, and this time it was Chris Robinson? What if I want to change that mentor? You actually have to submit a request because the NCOPE staff can't just change it to anyone. We actually have to make sure that they've done all the training and are linked to your program. So you can click and load that form up and they'll say, oh, there's my name, there's my mentor's name. Do you need to complete the evaluation of the mentor? No. And then who's going to be my new mentor? Have they done all the training? Yeah, they're good. What's their work email address? Let's pick Mr. Robert Lipschitz, who I work with over at Shirley Ryan Ability Lab, and hit next. Cool. And then it'll give the resident a chance to submit this change information and hit the next button, and they'll be able to actually request that the NCOPE staff change them to a different mentor, because mentors and residents have a one-to-one relationship. So in the old system, Typhon, some of you may have used it as residents, some of you may have used it as mentors. That system allowed one resident to have up to 20 mentors. The challenge was when it was time to get the forms filled out, NCOPE didn't know who to reach out to and go, hey, you going to fill out this eval form? Because they have 20 mentors assigned. Now that we have a one-to-one relationship, accountability gets a heck of a lot easier for everyone. On that note, there's some other forms that are going to be useful. So keep in mind, you're going to be submitting things like professional activities once during your residency if you're a resident, or quarterly clinical track activities. And you're also going to evaluate the residency program and the mentor. And what I really like about this is when I click my view form button, you'll notice that it tells you exactly why you're doing this. It gives you some basic information. And if I agree to the terms, It pre-fills most of the information for me. The only thing you're going to have to do is just verify where you're at. So I'm going to say Shirley Ryan Ability Lab and second quarter eval. But it's really neat that the form automatically will continue to load up and prompt you for additional details where relevant. On that note, the rating scales are something that have been revised since the previous system as well, just to give a little bit more meaningful feedback. But what I'm going to do now is actually back out a little bit to Encode Tracker, because there's other forms that I want to show you as well, but those are going to relate more so to our various mentors. The only other thing, so remember this little help button here, FAQ is pretty handy. If you click on it, it'll open it up in a new tab, and there's all sorts of great things here. And if you click video tutorials, you actually can watch how to do these things. There's even like catchy background music. On that note, if you submit a trouble ticket here, help me with uploading data, that's going to let the programmers know that there's a problem. So if you actually need to talk to somebody that works at NCOPE, don't use this form, folks. So without further ado, I want to tell you a little bit about what do the mentors see. So the mentors log in, they have their own separate dashboard view. And as a mentor or director, you're going to see the number of residents you've been assigned. So in this case, we have a single mentor, a single resident assigned to this mentor. To get back to the screen at any time, they can just click dashboard. They also can click overview of residents and report access by clicking the little cap. They also can go ahead and pull clinical experience data or forms, very similar to what we've seen before. You'll also notice that they have the same help icon and profile as the resident. Pretty cool. So who's my assigned resident or mentor? If you want to figure that out and you're the mentor, all you got to do is click on residents and it'll load right up for you. Again, if they're assigned to you, that means they're not assigned to anyone else in your clinic. So if you're thinking, there's somebody else that should be worried about this, not me. At the moment, it's you. So that resident needs to make sure they're actually assigned appropriately. And it's the resident's job to change that. Now, getting that resident changed again, this is something that the resident will do using the mentor change request form. It's built into the resident interface. You can email the NCOPE staff if you'd like. But on that note, we'll usually reply back and say, we will gladly process the mentor change request form once received from the resident. So again, that's the only way to do it. And I got a question. Hey, if I'm doing a combined O and P resident, can I have two mentors, one O and one P? You sure can't. It's a one-to-one relationship. So on that note, if you're doing a combined residency and you have two mentors that are perfectly doing 50% supervision of you, they're actually going to need to talk to each other when they fill out your eval form. But one of them is going to be bound and tied to work with you. Excellent question. Let me know if that addresses it. On that note, in terms of the residency, clinical data is going to be driving the residency experience. So there's a lot of different reporting that is available within the NCOPE system. Now, I recognize my mentors and directors, a lot of you are business owners and managers. So I recognize data drives your decisions, and it should drive how the residency is going as well. So in terms of the reporting that's available to both the resident and the mentor, because this screen I'm looking at here actually looks the same whether you are the mentor or the resident. But there's 4 basic reports, an executive report, which actually answers a lot of pretty big questions very easily. There's a full report, which has an awful lot of detail. There's so much detail, I actually made a separate video to guide you through how to read it. It's kind of like the difference between the dashboard on a Toyota Corolla and an F-16. The F-16 version is the full report. But if you just want to know how fast you're going, how many miles you got, executive report. There's also engagement overview and engagement over time. And those reports only work, they're visual graphical reports. It only works if the resident has at least 45 days of data logged. If they don't, it will generate a beautiful blank report. So you need 45 days of data to actually calculate and run it. So what about this executive report that I keep talking up? What's good for? you can very quickly see the very first page is going to show you the patient age groups as well as the gender of the patients being seen. So in this case, I can recognize that Rachel resident in our example, well, Rachel is seeing an awful lot of pediatric cases, less so adolescent, and then a very small number of senior or geriatric cases in adult, relatively low. But that's something I would expect if they're doing a pretty heavy pediatric rotation. On that note, total patient encounters. This is a number of encounters that resident has logged during these dates, January 1st, 2019 through June 6th, 2020. And then it'll take the total number of days patients were seen and divide this total count by the number of days patients were seen to calculate the average encounters seen per day. And you might be thinking 4.6 patients per day sounds pretty good. And I'd say, actually, that is a good average. The challenge is if the patient saw 128 patients and they actually worked 128 days, they're clearly not logging. So that can be a potential issue. On that note, the next page that you're going to encounter is the actual competencies themselves. So if you have an orthotic resident, you'll see the orthotic competencies and required experience as well. If you have a prosthetic resident, the prosthetic competencies. And guess what? If you're doing a combined O&B, you see both. On that note, we can see here really clearly, it looks like the resident's seeing an awful lot of things, except they have 0 scoliosis cases involved. So in these situations, this is usually a good trigger if you're the mentor director to realize we got to make sure that the resident's on schedule with patients who need scoliosis orthoses, or if you're at a clinic that doesn't see a lot, it might be time for you to actually make a phone call and talk to one of the sites that you're affiliated with about how do we gain this exposure. For example, I know a couple individuals here with the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, but also those VA hospitals have relationships with local pediatric focused clinical practices. And that's how they enable things like scoliosis to be demonstrated in terms of competency, as there's just not an awful lot of veterans with scoliosis. Now, is there a way to get more detail about what's happening day to day? And I'd say, heck yeah. You can download an Excel spreadsheet with every single case logged. The residents are going to do it from a screen called Create/Edit Dataset, and the mentors are going to do it from a screen called the Compliance Overview. Now, the mentors and directors, you're going to be filling out an awful lot of forms, but also they're the exact same forms you filled out from the old system, and the forms are aligned with the standards. And to be honest with you, if you used Typhon as a mentor before, you had to do 146 clicks to deem a resident competent. The new system, you can do it in about 40. So it doesn't take anywhere near as many. So mentors and directors are going to fill out quarterly evaluations of the resident, as well as the final evaluation of the resident, if you are the director. So the residency director is the only person that can fill out the final eval. So if you're a resident and your mentor goes, I can't see the form, odds are they either aren't the director or they don't have the director permission set up in Encode Tracker because they didn't say I was a director. On that note, there's also your competency forms. The orthotic competencies are 7, and prosthetic competencies are 5, and technical competency as well. So that technical competency must be demonstrated each residency. So if you do an orthotic residency first, you need a technical competency form. And if you do a prosthetic residency second, well, guess what? You still need to do another technical competency form. Also, your mentor director is going to fill out a form to evaluate the O&P education program that the resident attended, because they need to actually give feedback about how well prepared is this person walking out of school to function as a resident. Now we talk about competency forms. The old Typhon system, you might remember, there were 2 rungs on the ladder, competent and not competent. But all things being equal, there's actually multiple layers to getting towards competent. So in the wide world of competency, you actually can go even beyond that to the level of what's called proficiency or mastery. But some of your residents, they may be at a beginner level with certain skills like casting patients with hip disarticulations. I can tell you not a single school requires that every student cast a hip disarticulation. But I'd wager a lot of the residents are going to be developing or advancing when it comes to casting UCBLs. because they've actually slung a fair amount of fiberglass and plaster by the time they graduate and get their master's. Now, keep in mind, the main goal of residency is to develop competency. So if that resident was there for 12 months and they're not yet competent, that is not a complete residency. And I know this is different. I'm from an era where if you actually spent your full year of residency, and I know some of you are from an era where you spent 1,900 hours, as long as somebody with the letter CPO signed off afterwards, you could take your ABC exam. Not the case. To finish residency, competency must be done. And the resident should be deemed competent when they have sufficient knowledge, judgment, and skill to provide appropriate treatment interventions. The mentor or the director are the individuals that deem the person competent. I've had a few residents go, hey, how do I make myself competent? And I said, do orthotics and prosthetics, see patients. But if you need to be deemed competent, the mentor or director does that. And besides needing to be deemed competent before the end of the residency, keep in mind, that resident needs to be deemed competent before they can progress to what's known as indirect supervision. So if you have a resident that you want to have go over to a local skilled nursing facility and cast for an AFO while you stay back at the office, they need to be deemed competent to do that. So make sure that you've done that before they go out. Because at the end of the day, not only is it a concern of facility accreditation, this is actually ABC's language. It also can be a liability issue, because if they're casting for the AFO and they accidentally cut a patient with a hook blade, it might be outside of the scope of your malpractice insurance if they actually aren't supposed to be there based on your facility requirements anyway. So be careful. Now, the competency form has been submitted. The NCOPE staff will check the box in my record, right? And a lot of residents and also mentors think, well, the NCOPE staff, yeah, they're not double checking all these. They're just going in and there's a computer program that somebody wrote that checks the box, right? Actually, no. At the end of the day, let's imagine that Jeff, the prosthetic resident's mentor, submitted a competency form for postoperative care saying Jeff is competent. A staff member, usually Eric, but sometimes myself, will actually go through that resident's logs and see, did the resident fit a shrinker, a rigid movable dressing, or an IPOP independently? And if the answer is no, we can't deem that resident competent. It simply can't be done. On that note, speaking of postoperative care, the biggest thing I run into with case entries is a lot of residents will log their cases and deliver a shrinker or a flow tech. On that note, when they deliver that device, they pick the device type as transtibial, which is a socket that you can walk on, whether preparatory or definitive. So keep in mind, we need to have the actual device of a shrinker or an RRD or some other device chosen. And again, you really can't be competent at something if you've never actually done it yourself independently. Now, a question I'm asked a lot, and it's a good one. Did the NCOPE staff get the form? Well, you can always try to send us an email, but to be honest with you, if you do, what will probably happen is we'll send you back a link to this. There's a tool called the Resident Status Report. And what's neat about this, and this is different for those of you that are my mentors, is the resident or the assigned mentor can run a status report and see every single form that the NCOPE staff has formally received regarding that resident. Now, remember on my last screen, I talked a little bit about a person double checks all these things. So since a human's double checking it, you need to give us 2 business days to actually log the form as received. It's not going to just show up on the status report right away because we need to double check that the form has been submitted and we have documentation to back it up. And Heidi's asking a question about supervisor status. So supervisor status, ooh, that's fun. That is a super secret level of permissions that exist for individuals working at large residency sites. And Heidi works at one of the largest hospital-based O&P residencies in the country. So what this allows you to do is actually create multiple layers of supervision. So if you're at a residency site with 6 or more residents, feel free to reach out to me. But to answer your question directly, Heidi, can a supervisor run the status report? You bet. Yes, they can. So the other thing that we run into is we have an awful lot of residents who are really excited about reaching the last day of their residency. I think I'm done. Can I get my certificate? remember, all those requirements are all the cases logged, are all forms submitted with proper supporting documentation. And I can tell you the most often overlooked form is a final evaluation of the resident by the director. A lot of times I'll have the mentor fill out a fourth quarter evaluation of the resident, but the final eval actually is a different form, and it actually attests that the residency is truly done. The other form that's often overlooked is a form that the resident completes called the evaluation of the residency program. I have a lot of residents say, I only filled out the eval of the mentor. It's a shorter form. So that's something that you don't necessarily need to be worried about. Kasha, that's a good question. It's not related to Tracker, so I'm not going to touch it until we get to the end, if that's okay. On that note, if you can't say yes to all of the items being done, all cases are logged, all forms are together, the NCOPE staff will not even begin the process of double checking and submitting that certificate. So until the status report reflects this resident has logged all cases and submitted all documentation, and mentors and directors have too, there's no possibility of issuing a certificate for the resident. So what does the data show? I get a lot of folks that actually like to know, what are we doing with all this data from NCOPE? And Kasha, this is going to touch upon your question a little bit. That's why I wanted to withhold it. What level of engagement does a resident typically participate in? And I can tell you, a resident who's fresh out of school, they're in their first quarter, they assist about 45% of the time. They just observe about 16% of the time, and they're independent about 39% of the time if we actually look at the breakdown. Now, the final quarter of residency, before they sit those board exams, you notice that the average resident is independent 72% of the time, and they're observing just 3% of the time, because there might be a really tricky case coming in that it is in the best interest that they observe. And assist, that goes down to 25%. On that note, if we actually take a look at our interventions and devices, what's a typical orthotic residency look like? The average orthotic residency is about 30% AFOs. And this is a little higher than the ABC practice analysis. And that's okay. The other thing that we've noticed is residents in general do a higher percentage of cranial remolding orthoses than what the ABC practice analysis shows. We're at 7%. And something that I just like to be really transparent about, 9.2% of the average resident caseload is diabetic shoes and inserts. And although it's not an NCOPE competency for the residents who are attending, keep in mind, providing patient care is the mission of the clinics you are working at. Now, what about those prosthetic residents? Are we a little bit different than the ABC practice analysis? And I'd say, yeah, we have a higher percentage of transtibial cases. Transtibial cases are 61% of the average prosthetic resident load. And transfemoral, when we actually look at socket replacements as well as initial prostheses, that's about 25% of the average caseload. The rest, it's a mishmash of upper limb and other various disarticulations, hip disarticulations, et cetera. And those combined O&P residents, because I have a combined O&P resident joining us today, you'll find that it's usually pretty well balanced. The average combined O&P resident does more AFOs than anything, and the second most common thing they do, transtibial cases. The third most common thing that they're engaged with, foot orthoses. So it's actually pretty consistent with the ABC practice analysis. The other thing is within Encode Tracker, there's an awful lot of evaluations going on. There's an awful lot of ratings. And at the end of the day, I'd like to just commend the mentors, because the average resident rates their experience as a resident very highly. So all my data from 2022 so far, every resident has felt their residency program has met expectations, exceeded expectations, or always exceeded expectations. As a matter of fact, always exceeds expectations and was chosen 66% of the time. So for those of you that are residents now, if you're thinking, is this going to be good? If we're going to look at the numbers, you got pretty good odds it's going to be a pretty good learning opportunity. And one of the things I did recently is I actually did a presentation looking at the Ohio adjoining states. And they were very proud to see that the states of Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, and Kentucky actually had an even higher percentage. So I said I would gladly give them kudos. On that note, how do residency sites rate their residents' performance? So ultimately, it's going to vary quarter by quarter. So you'll find that the percentage of residents that consistently exceed expectations in the first quarter, it's only about 27%. But as they start progressing and working their way through to, let's say, a 6th quarter, if they're doing a combined residency, you see this purple bar continues to grow. And this blue band where it says the resident meets minimum expectations, but no more, those blue bands are shrinking as well. So at the end of the day, residents do better as they work through their residency. And if we look at the data year over year, because a lot of folks said, what about COVID? Like, are these graduates coming out of school getting the same training? But actually looking at the data right now, it appears that the individuals that did have their education affected by COVID are performing admirably, because these are folks that would have actually been affected during 2020 and 2021. And those numbers actually look better than 2019 and 18. Interestingly enough, 2019 and 18 were very busy years for people with bachelor's degrees in O&P scrambling to get their second residency done so they could get CPO after their name. Because starting January 1st, 2020, you couldn't sit the ABC exam with less than a master's degree. So at the end of the day, the 2 years that had a big influx of baccalaureate trained P&O individuals actually had some of the lowest ratings. So the master's grads, you're doing great. Keep it up. Well, I'm signed in as Chris Robinson. And I'm signed in also as a residency director, because there's actually a couple of other little things that have been added that are pretty darn cool to the system. So I have one active resident, and you also may see information on past residents. So if you've hosted a residency program for a while and you click this link, you actually can see the residents that have been previously assigned to you in your clinic, and you can generate reports on those individuals. Because, well, it's always nice to have a little bit of data to figure out, is this individual, how did the residency go? Are they seeing a good patient distribution? But to work with your current residents, you're always going to go underneath active. So I'm going to go back to my active resident view, and it takes a couple of seconds to load up. And the reason it's taking a little more time for me is I work at a residency site that does a huge volume of residents. So I'm a clinician at the Shirley Ryan Ability Lab. But we can see Rachel resident, here we go, is assigned. And when I click on compliance overview, I can really easily see, has she been logging cases? If you see red for a month, like March 2022, February 2022, January 2022, that means Rachel logged 0 cases. Not good. So that's a problem. And then yellow means that Rachel logged less than 40 patient encounters. You might be thinking, why 40? Like, is it 60? Is that an NCOPE rule? No, if we just took a look, though, at standard deviations, we found that even residents at kind of slow residency sites, we're still seeing at least 40 patient encounters a month. So that's the reason why that number is there. Ideally, this should be blue all the way across. Now, if you're at a residency site that has a unique format, like Stan Patterson in Orlando, he has 1 patient a day come in that the resident works with. So that resident in a month, they work 21 days a month, and they see 21 patients, and they never get a blue bar, ever. But also they see the same patient from 8 in the morning till 6 at night, and they take that patient from an eval to a test socket to a second test socket to some gait training in 1 day. So that's why their logs generally appear lower. So is it always a red flag? No. But in general, if your resident typically spends 30 to 90 minutes with a patient, I expect at least 40 case encounters per month. Otherwise, I bet there's something off. Now, what if I wanted to run those fancy executive reports and things for Rachel? How do I do that? This little paper airplane here is how you do it. It says generate report. And when I click on it, not only will I be able to generate a new report, I can see every report that was run previously. So the very first report we ever ran for Rachel is this one here. And I can click on it and see the visual engagement, whether they were observing, assisting, or working independently. We could also see all the full reports and executive reports, but the best advice I can give you, you're always going to want to generate a report fresh because it's going to give you the most comprehensive data set. And I'm going to go ahead and go way back. I'm going to go back to 2018, because I think that actually might be as far back as I go. for Rachel's demo data. And through yesterday. And what you'll see is when you run a report, a note is entered. So if the NCOPE staff is double checking our resident, you'll see us type in NCOPE staff right at the bottom. But I'm going to hit my send button, and it actually takes just a few seconds to generate. So it's going to be thinking, what are all those cases? Let's download them all. So I'm pulling a huge report. But on that note, it's done. We got it. So I'm going to hit my download button and load it up. And I can see during this time frame, I have 39 patient encounters. Total days patients were seen was 20. So 39 divided by 20 is 2. So 2 patients a day, that's a pretty slow residency. Highest number of patients per day I've seen averaged over a full residency was 9. On that note, the resident was at a site that did a huge hospital call inpatient volume. So they had a lot of things like PRAFO deliveries in between those CAFO deliveries. But if we take a look, we can see very clearly not a lot of pediatric or adolescent care going on. We have very adult and senior heavy, and also the vast majority of cases have identified as male. Furthermore, if this were my resident, I'd have to figure out what are we going to do to get this resident more exposure to upper limb, as well as signs and partial foot encounters, because those are required competencies. If they have 0 cases logged, that doesn't just mean that they have 0 cases logged as seeing the patient independently. That means they haven't even observed any cases. And that's bad news because both of these are required competencies. You also can go ahead and run a diagnostic report. So it'll show you the most common diagnoses. And for prosthetic residency, acquired absence of the left or right leg above or below is very common. What you don't want to see a lot of is missing diagnosis. That means that the resident in their top 25 diagnoses, entering nothing is one of their top 25 most likely things they do. So that's not a great outcome either. But you can get a pretty nice snapshot from an executive summary. And what's neat about the executive summaries is you can narrow it down to a very specific period of time. Do you want to see how they've done over just the past 2 weeks? Run it for the last 2 weeks. Do you want to see it for the whole residency? Go for it. On that note, what about this full report, this document that shows us absolutely everything? So now I actually have enough with some data. So this is run over a 3-month span. We can see total appointments per month, total patient appointments by type and gender, orthotic and prosthetic. So if they're doing a combined residency, they'll actually have additional columns available. And you'll see a further breakdown of the patient's age groups. Top 25 diagnoses is still the same, plus engagement. This is something that I think is just fascinating. This green bar is independent, and ideally, this green bar, you should actually see going upwards. So the percentage of cases they're doing independently should go up. And this red bar, observing, should ideally go down, although you'll notice assisting plummeted while independent care went up. That's a pretty good situation right there. You also can see how engaged they are by age groups. So, for example, when children come into the clinic, are they working independently? It looks like they're very independent on your pediatric cases up to 12. But when we actually take a look at our adolescent cases, we see that there's actually a higher percentage of assisting. And that's pretty common in clinics that do a lot of scoliosis. Now, this actually lends itself, and why I wanted to go through this report, to the question I had earlier. My residency site focuses on pediatrics. They do some adult stuff, though. Do I need to be exposed to a larger percentage of one versus another? The answer is no. The standards have no exact percentage that say a minimum of X percentage of pediatrics must be needed to be competent. So competency is usually deemed on the patient population that your clinic has the greatest access to. So the likelihood that you're going to deliver a CAFO by yourself is likely going to be on a child if you're doing mostly peds. If you're at the VA, I'd wager you're more than likely going to demonstrate competency on somebody who's of a geriatric patient population. But this report has just about every breakdown that you could possibly imagine. It's a beautiful report, and they take about 30 seconds to run. Because the key here is, as a residency director or mentor, and a resident, to be honest with you, you don't want to walk in and go, I feel like it's going okay. Is it? Because we have all the data that you might want to cross-reference to figure out, how are things going? Are things really working out as well as you had hoped? Use this to inform your conversation, because you have actionable items and data points versus just subjective opinion. And this is very useful, not only to make the residency better, but to ensure that you're going to meet all of the requirements in a timely manner. On that note, one of the other things that I just wanted to show is, if you do have director level access, there's the Active Residence Monthly Report. And the Active Residence Monthly Report takes a little bit of time to run, but what it can typically do, go ahead and generate report, pick my date range from the 1st of April, Fool's Day, through May 12th, send. But it can actually give you a tabulation of the total number of cases seen month by month. So this is really handy for somebody like Heidi, who works at UCSF, who might have as many as 6 residents at a given time. And what you can do now is just click download, and it's in a CSV format. That is a type of file that is usually open with the Excel system. So Microsoft Excel usually pops open. And of course, it opened up on one of my 7 other monitors, forgive me. But you can see all the residents that were active during that time period. You could see their residency end date and start date, and the number of cases they logged in that month. In this case, Rachel resident logged 1 case in April. And if that were the case, it would be time to have a conversation with Rachel, because they're not meeting expectations. So if you were ever thinking, Chris, all those reports are neat, but I like to do my own data and analytics, go for it. You can download it into Excel yourself. And the resident has that same level of power. So if you're the resident and you're thinking, I'm really good at Excel, that'll be very useful for you. There's one job skill that employers seek value in outside of O&P and in general, that would be skill with Excel. So I'm going to log in as a resident. If you're looking at the left-hand menu thinking, oh, those are a lot more menus than you showed me, Chris, don't panic. It's just my interface for the administrator. But if Rachel resident wanted to sign in and download every one of her cases, she can just click Open View or Edit, that screen where we tweaked our records, hit the little download button here, and click on that. And now Rachel can see every single case she's ever logged, whether they entered the case manually, primary diagnostic codes, but you essentially could do any level of analytics that you're comfortable doing with Microsoft Excel. This could be pulled into just about anything. So it's really powerful for larger programs, or like the Baylor College of Medicine, for example. We've been able to do some really fascinating analytics using this export functionality.